Groan was an Irish woman who defied not just the odds and the mores of her time, but also both English and Irish law, to become a feared and fearless sea captain and a renowned leader of men.
Now that's what I call a hero.
The problem in attempting to tell the story of Groan or Grace O'Malley, the Pirate Queen, lies in trying to untangle fact from fiction. She was most definitely a powerful woman who actually was, at times, a pirate. She controlled a small navy and could put to sea with 3 large galleys and upwards of 300 fully armed marines. Whatever way you cut it, that's real power.
Billy, what am I wearing? You're actually wearing soldiers' clothes from the 16th century.
Okay.
Yeah, the Gaelic Irish soldiers, the Cairn T in particular, would have worn this kind of clothing. You have a jacket. We know that these were commonly worn by soldiers, and underneath then you have what's called a lena or a lena crish. The crish part of it comes from crocus because they were dyed with saffron. They would have been very expensive to make. They're very voluminous. We have accounts of the English banning the Irish from using too much cloth in their clothing because they were dressing above their station. So you would have been typical of the type of 16th century soldier that Groan might have employed as mercenaries.
What sort of Ireland is she born into?
It's a very tumultuous country. Population of probably about 750,000, divided up into around 60 kingdoms or chieftainships, who are forming various alliances, fighting against each other. We know the Tudors are reconquering Ireland at that time, so there's Gaelic rebellion against that. Some people are siding with the English and undergoing surrender in a grant where they'll offer their land to the English crown and it gets awarded back to them under English charters. Others are resisting against it. You have the native Gaelic aristocracy, you have what's known as the Old English, who are the descendants of the Anglo-Normans and Cambro-Norman settlers, who have been thoroughly Gaelicised, but are looking after their own interests as well. People forming alliances, sometimes fighting the English, sometimes fighting each other. Someone like Groan would have been born into, where she is in West Mayo. Her family, and her in particular, sometimes she sides with the English if it suits her, follows English laws and customs. Sometimes she observes the Gaelic laws and sides with some of the local Gaelic chieftains. So political opportunism as much as anything else, but a very tumultuous place.
Groan's name appears on a map from the time, showing the chieftains of Ireland and the land they controlled. The only woman on that map, or any map like it. She was a de facto chieftain, but she could never be a chieftain. There was no room for women in that particular club. Actually, there wasn't even room for women in the official records.
Brother Michael.
Hall.
Oh, yeah. Brother Hall. What are you working on?
The annals of myself and the other 3 masters.
Anybody interesting?
Well, yes, actually. The guy I'm on the moment is a terribly exciting chieftain from Mayo. Sea captain as well. Groan Some man for one man.
Groan you say?
Groan yes.
Isn't Groan a girl's name?
Ah, shite.
We'll have to start the whole thing again.
Yeah. Painful. Very painful, Brother Hall. Burn the lance to boil quickly. I'll help you. A fresh start. Greener pastures. Turn over a new leaf. Yeah.
I just meant this page.
Oh, God, I forgot that one.
No.
Groan was born sometime around 1530, the only child of Owen O'Malley and his wife, Margaret. The O'Malleys were unusual in the way they earned their living, trading, fishing, ferrying, occasional piracy, and levying tolls on ships passing through what they considered to be their waters. One of the family strongholds was here on Clare Island. You see, we know where she lived, but we don't know exactly when she was born, which is kind of typical with Grace O'Malley. It's almost miraculous that we know anything about Groan at all, isn't it?
I suppose it is, but the oral tradition is a tradition in Ireland that has been there forever, and it's been wonderful that Grace O'Malley has been remembered in the oral tradition and also through songs and poetry. In fact, it was through the oral tradition that I heard about her first and foremost from my father, who told us the story of Grace O'Malley, and he used to bring me to the O'Malley gatherings. The O'Malleys meet every year, and in the old clan system style they elect a Taoiseach who becomes chieftain the next year. So I just assumed that women were equal to men from the stories of Grace O'Malley, until slowly but surely I learned otherwise, and learned that even though she acted and did everything that a chieftain of the time did, she wasn't a recognised chieftain because, according to Brehon laws, a woman couldn't become chieftain. But she was written into the margins of the state papers, the English state papers, which is very interesting.
What sort of activities would the O'Malley clan have been involved in?
The thing about the O'Malley clan in terms of other clans in Ireland at the time, and you'll see it from the motto, it's Terra Marique Potens, which means powerful on land and sea. So that was the difference in the O'Malleys, is that they had a fleet of ships and they did trade with Portugal and North Africa. So the highway was the sea.
Groan's family motto was powerful by land and sea, because mottos are always like that. Fortune favours the brave, powerful by land and sea. They're never like, just do your best. Every little helps, whatever, who cares, you know? And family crests always have scary animals like boars or bears or wolves. There's never a chicken slapping a weasel in the face. That's what I want in my crest, a chicken slapping a weasel in the face, and the motto, you weren't fucking expecting that now, were you? Given that her father was a chieftain, what sort of upbringing would Groan have had?
Well, we know the children of chieftains were very often fostered out to other aristocratic families. The boys, at least, would have been taught, and possibly Groan as well, things like horse riding, you know, the skills that would have been appropriate, hunting, cattle raiding probably as well. And actually something that was common amongst the people in Erris in County Mayo, a very popular pastime that they had to learn there, would have been hawking and hunting with hawks.
Cool.
Yeah, very cool.
Do you actually have a hawk? You got a hawk. That is cool. Wow, he's lovely, isn't he?
Yeah.
That's a relief, because normally you do weird stuff to me, and when you put on a glove in one hand and a hawk arrived, oh, thank God. Whereas I thought you were going to go. And what was very important in 16th century Ireland was prostate health. I was genuinely worried. What else can we infer or do we know about Groan's childhood?
Well, one of the most famous incidents from her childhood, which survives in the folk tradition, is how she got her name, Groan Whale. The whale generally refers to, in folk tradition, as bald. The story was that her father wouldn't let her be on the ships because she had long hair and it was inappropriate. It would get caught in the rigging and so on and so forth. So she cut it all off. And then the whale means bald. But, you know, it's probably an instance of folk etymology where people make up the story to fit the name. Her name probably comes from the area where she was from, Groan Uwal Iwale. So it could have either been Uwal, the place where she was from, the Mayo, or the Iwale. But they invented the story then to make up the name.
So Groan Whale, the apparently well-educated daughter of a Gaelic chieftain, grows up with a love and a knowledge of ships and the sea. But in 16th century Ireland, a life on the ocean waves, however much she might want it, is never going to happen.
The power system in Mayo was based on Brehon law. So it was a clan focus. The English system was primogeniture, which is that succession in title passes from father to son. In Ireland it's very different. It's based on clan elections, so the chieftainship is vested in one individual. It doesn't pass to their son when they die. They decided who it was based on merit, and they did that while the chieftain was still alive, and that was supposed to prevent warfare between the clans.
Groan gets married quite young, well, quite young by modern standards.
She does. She's 16 when she gets married, but that would be young by current standards, but not really so much at the period of the time it would have been expected for a girl to get married in her teens.
Who does she marry?
She marries Donal and Cuggy, who's one of the O'Flahertys. So the O'Flahertys were a neighbouring clan. They were quite powerful, so it was a good alliance between the O'Malleys and the O'Flahertys to have these two married. Groan was quite exceptional in that, in addition to just managing the household, and by household you have to understand that it would have been a full castle, all the servants, all the clan living in the surrounding area. But in addition to that, she also obviously got a bit bored and decided to go back to sea, and started her career of maintenance by land and sea, going around basically raiding in the surrounding areas and also trading. She went out on trading missions as well.
The English had a system called primogeniture, which means that the eldest son would inherit everything from the da, his land, his title, his job. We pronounce that the dole. Like there's lads in Game of Thrones looking at Fianna Fáil going, Jesus, that is incestuous. Within this system, Donal was the Taoiseach and next in line to become the O'Flaherty, chieftain of his clan. But that wasn't to be.
Donal is killed by the Joyces. Basically, there had been a dispute for many years over this castle. And what happens is basically Donal had won the fight. He was fighting with the Joyces. They caught him while he was out on a raid and killed him. They came expecting then that they would be able to just march in, kick everybody out of the castle, and Groan was having none of it. She basically defended the castle, pulled everyone in, fought them off, and the Joyces went home with their tails between their legs.
When Donal dies, she goes back to Mayo. She brings O'Flaherty men with her back to Mayo, and that seems like a remarkable thing to do.
For the O'Flahertys to have left their own clan in any event would have been unusual. You might have expected they might have gone if there was a stronger male, but to have followed a woman back to her own clan, so back to the O'Malleys, to leave everything they had and go with her. They had obviously had a huge amount of faith, confidence, and she had obviously proven herself by what she had been doing while she was married to Donal.
Groan's first husband is killed by the Shoigas, okay? The Joyces, not Sheila and Groan, obviously. Although I'd love to see that, just to see how awkward Groan would be reporting it on Crime Call the next night. Sergeant, you bring us now to a brutal murder in Connemara. Yes, thank you, Groan. Gardaí are currently searching for two absolute feckin' rides. And how can we help? Gardaí all over Ireland are waiting for your call. Text flirts to 1-800-VEHICLE. Can I ask, where were you and Sheila on the night in question? We were presenting a live broadcast for TG Car. So there's no one who can verify your whereabouts. According to English law, on the death of her husband, Groan would have been entitled to a third of his estate. That didn't happen. According to Brehon law, on the death of her husband, Groan should at least have gotten her dowry back. So what does she get after Donal dies?
Well, when Donal is killed, Groan is a widow, and she has 3 young children, and there's not a lot for widows in Brehon law. She brought a dowry with her to Donal on her marriage, but she says in later life that that was withheld from her. She comes back here to Mayo, and she seems to have settled on Clare Island, which was part of her father's territory. And it's on Clare Island, really, that this career woman, if you like, the legend of the Pirate Queen really gets born, because you have this woman on her own, slowly but surely building up this as a power base for herself, going back to doing what she was reared as a young child and what generations of O'Malleys had done before her, going back to the sea. They always thought of the sea off Clare Island, and indeed off this west coast of Mayo, as their territory, just as the merchant princes of Galway charged high taxes to do business in Galway. The O'Malleys said, well, you pay tolls for us for safe passage. And that's exactly what she did, and she became a very wealthy woman because of that.
So at a point in history when the native Brehon laws were being superseded by English law, it would seem Groan was actually benefiting from neither. Mind you, I'm not altogether sure about Brehon law. Some of it was just plain weird.
In Brehon law, we had what was known as the Loch Nano, or the face value. So everybody in society, from the very highest up to the slaves and the commoners, had a particular value associated with them. And, you know, how high your status was in society obviously dictated how valuable you were as a person. If somebody wounded you or killed you, for example, they would have to pay compensation. If you injured a king, if you left a mark on the face of the king, the punishment, the fine would be much, much higher than if you wounded a farmer, for example, or something like that.
But what would happen if you couldn't pay the fine then? What if you were poor?
There are a whole series of punishments for people who couldn't afford to pay the fines. If you want to go this way, I'll show you one of the punishments that they did have. So, you're about to become Murcurta, which is an old Irish term for somebody who, as a form of punishment, was put into a curragh of a single animal hide, and they were cast out at sea, and they were given enough food for one day, and if they were drowned at sea, that was their fate, and if they washed up on shore, they became an outsider, an outcast, unless they were taken in. For example, if they washed up in a different tuath or a different kingdom, they could be taken in and serve under the lord of that tuath.
Right, sir.
So
it's a good chance that you're probably going to be washed back on shore.
Yeah, of course.
Somewhere warm,
yeah.
dry. Yeah.
So, in you get.
I get into that.
Yeah.
Any particular good way to get into one of these bad boys?
Don't jump too quick.
Okay. So. Yeah, that's not particularly stable, is it? There. Right.
Off you go.
Give me the oar.
Yeah, you don't get an oar.
Oh, you don't get an oar. Sure, you get an oar.
No, you're at the mercy of the sea and the wind.
You've put me in the sea in a contact lens and I don't get an oar. And also, this tide is actually dragging me out. Back on Clare Island, the widowed Groan whale with 3 galleys and a number of smaller boats threw herself headlong into her new career, and the legend of the Pirate Queen was born. She had mouths to feed, and she had learned that the best way to get what she wanted was to go and take it. It was easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. So a life on the ocean waves suddenly wasn't a vague possibility, it was a practical solution to the situation in which she found herself. But it wasn't an easy option.